Walking through the city, lights all aglow. Everybody's got a story to show. Wheels keep spinning, streets overflow. Hustle never stops, we're in the flow. Skylines high like our dreams in the air. Concrete jungle, we got flair. Rhythm of the night, we don't care. Underneath the stars we breathe rare. In this urban jungle we're alive. Heartbeats echo as we strive. Dreams collide where the streets survive. Together we'll thrive, side by side. Echoes of the past linger near. Future calls, we face it with no fear. Every corner tells a tale so clear. In the city, we chase what we hold dear. Shadows and whispers blend in the night. City's pulse beats with all its might. Lost in the chaos, but it feels right. We rise above, reach new heights. In this urban jungle, we're alive. Heartbeats echo as we strive. Dreams collide where the streets survive. Together we'll thrive, side by side.
And welcome to tonight's show. Welcome, Road Cone Witch. I would love to know, did you have to travel to Master to get it?
No, I bought it online like a good witch.
Good witch. And did you magically go to the closet like they do in Sabrina and the courier arrived with the parcel? Or was it more like you had to wait for New Zealand Post to turn up?
No, it just arrived as soon as I ordered it.
It's alright, it seems to be a bit of a thing about road cones.
Yes, the road code theme. I was meant to receive it last week, but it did not come, so I had to borrow a road cone from down the road. But now I returned the road cone, googly eyes and all, and I've got this road cone.
Is the googly eye one still out there on the road?
It is.
Now, let's just sit down there before we get to the real stuff. Apparently, we've got a fellow fan clashing with our stream.
Circuit breaker initiative that we put in place, and we did it towards the end
So,
of the time in government.
just to let you know, our friend Andrew Kai is live streaming on that. So make sure you go and subscribe to his channel. We need to help him get up to 500 subscribers so you can get YouTube partnership.
Yes, do subscribe to Andrew. He's got good stuff, good commentary. I respect what he's doing.
Yeah, I just wished he chose a different time to do the show, but hey, that's all good.
Unfortunately, I don't have a time portal. Maybe that needs to be the next thing I buy online.
No time for commenting.
Yeah, I need to order a wormhole.
Oh yes, there all sorts that can be in there. Yeah, no, it's definitely get that. So let's get to the fun part and let's get off to our first bill, the climate change changes response trading amendment bill.
introduce this legislation to the House. The bill takes a balanced, practical step towards protecting our most productive farmland while still supporting our climate goals. It's about preserving choice, the choice to farm, the choice to grow, and the choice to sustain rural communities for generations to come. Madam Speaker, the primary sector is vital to the success of our economy. Our farmers feed New Zealand and the world. I also acknowledge the significant role forestry plays, contributing to regional employment and helping us meet our emissions targets. But the current settings in the emissions trading scheme have tipped the scales too far. We're seeing entire farms converted into exotic forests under the ETS, from Invercargill to Ruatoria. These are not marginal lands. These are productive farms supporting families, communities and local economies. And once they are planted into exotic carbon forests, they are effectively lost to food production for decades, if not permanently. So this is not balanced land use. It is not sustainable, and it is not fair to the rural communities who bear the brunt of these conversions. Madam Speaker, the bill introduces targeted, sensible limits on whole farm conversions into exotic forestry under the ETS. It does not ban forestry. It does not undermine our climate commitments. What it does is to protect our best land for food production while still allowing farmers to diversify and to participate in the ETS where it makes sense. There is still a great deal of land that can be utilised for forestry, of course. The bill introduces 4 key changes to the ETS forestry planting in New Zealand. 1, restrictions on exotic forestry ETS registration on actively farmed land, use capability class 1 through 6, our most productive land. 2, an annual ballot allowing 15,000 hectares of exotic forest on class 6 land, providing planting opportunities while managing planting scale nationally. 3, a 25% cap allowing farmers to plant up to a quarter of their land in exotic forests for ETS purposes to maintain flexibility and income diversity. And 4, temporary transitional protections for those who invest in good faith before December 2024. These changes are grounded in the Land Use Capability Classification System, a well-established tool that reflects the productivity of our land. By focusing restrictions on the most productive classes, we ensure that low-quality land, native forest planting and planting on certain types of Maori land remain viable options. To support those who made legitimate afforestation investments before this policy was announced last December, the bill includes temporary transitional exemptions for new restrictions. In order to qualify, a potential ETS applicant will need to provide evidence that a qualifying forestry investment, as specified in the bill, has been made in relation to that LUC 1 through 6 land they seek to register in the ETS. This will both allow for affected investors to proceed with planted forest projects, recognising investments already in train, while also ensuring qualifying forest investments demonstrate a genuine investment in relation to a specific piece of LUC 1 through 6 land. For instance, Madam Speaker, the purchase of land and ordering of trees together would be an example of proof of a qualifying forestry investment as long as it took place before the 1st of December 2024, whilst each of these actions alone would not demonstrate that. Investment must also have been made between 1 January 2021 and 4 December 2024, so that we are only allowing those exemptions for recent investments and real intentions. These exemptions will be assessed on a case-by-case basis by the regulator at the point of ETA registration, but the conditions for transitional arrangements have been published previously and are clearly set out in the legislation. Madam Speaker, this is not about pitting farming against forestry. It's about maximising land use for our whole rural sector. Both agriculture and forestry can coexist in a way that is sustainable, strategic and fair. Whole farm conversions don't just affect landowners, they affect entire communities, schools, local businesses and services all depend upon the steady year-round activity that farming provides. Exotic carbon forestry, by contrast, offers short bursts of economic activity, often decades apart. These bursts can be significant, especially when spread across a region with staggered forest ages, but they cannot come at the total expense of our farming communities. And let's not forget, this is also about New Zealand's global reputation. We are known for high-quality, sustainably produced food. That reputation is built on the back of our farmers. If we allow productive farmland to disappear under a blanket of trees, we risk undermining that brand and the livelihood that depends on it. We as a government have publicly committed to legislation taking effect in October 2025. Forestry remains a vital part of our climate response and rural economy, providing jobs, carbon sequestration and export value, but it must be integrated in a way that complements, not replaces, our food production systems. By continuing to provide the planting pathways, we are offering a balanced approach to maximising production on farms. Madam Speaker, this bill is about balance, it's about choice and it's about protecting the future of rural New Zealand. Let us back our farmers and let us back our regions and let us preserve the right to farm for future generations. Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Okay.
Now, is everyone ready for math?
Yeah, let's start talking about a bit of maths and
Right. So, okay, let's address the first thing, right? I actually don't hate the idea of this bill, but this is a big but. I don't see how this bill won't undermine climate commitments, right? He's out here saying, well, this bill's not going to impact climate commitments, but we are restricting the amount of trees you can plant on your land or amount of exotic trees you can put in place for carbon farming. So I don't know how this bill is going to not undermine climate commitments. But anyways, I'll give them this. I agree that there should be limits on exotic forest plantations, and we need to be encouraging farmers to preserve established native forest and convert low quality land. That's a very vague definition. That's very vague to me. What is low quality land? But anyways, over to native forest. So the good part about this bill is that it does not restrict native forest planting. But keep in mind, guys, here's the kicker. It can also be bad if you're trying to limit corporations from buying up farmland for carbon credits. Because it's like, oh, okay, we don't have to plant a bunch of radiata pine. Okay, let's just buy it up anyways and put native trees on there. Now, I have a hate-love relationship with that concept. I think it's great to convert farmland back into native forest. We need it. But I don't like the idea of corporations owning that land. So that's the first thing, guys, you need to be aware of, especially farmers that are listening in. This won't prevent productive farmland from being converted over to forestry. What this bill does is it limits what farmland can be converted to. So, like a full farm conversion over from productive sheep and beef farming over to carbon credits, right? So it limits that, but it doesn't limit someone from buying up a piece of land and going, right, I'm going to put in a forestry. So
Lily from Big Save Furniture, Family Trust, could sit there and buy up land and throw away their values of stopping carbon farming going on in the Tauraruas and the Hawke's Bay, and they could decide to sit down there and just plant it with trees.
Well, yeah, as long as it's like native trees. Because all this does, I mean, technically they could still buy the farm as long as the farmland only has 25% dedicated to like radiata pine trees. Now, for those that aren't forestry people like I am, a radiata pine is those, you know how at Christmas time you see Christmas trees for sale? Those are your radiata pines. So those are the ones that you buy in New Zealand. But anyways, so you can have your farmland, 25% of your farmland can be planted for carbon credits with that species of tree. So it doesn't even stop that type of plantation. But yeah, this is where it gets really interesting because I don't know what data or reports Todd utilized. I searched up and down the internet, and what I found, the most relevant report I found was commissioned by Sheep and Beef New Zealand Limited. And I'm going to post that report in the chat so people can go click on it and read it for themselves. But I've got real issues with this report. Hold on a minute. Just give me a couple of seconds.
All right. And for those who are wondering, I'm bringing up pictures of radiata pines.
Excellent.
Just to put some context to the situation.
Yeah, so that's your radiata pine, right? So you see these trees everywhere. They're the most common tree we use in forestry. So when you go to Mitre 10 and you go to buy some wood, okay, that's the species of trees it's coming from. And when I was working in forestry, this was the majority of wood that I was cutting up with my big Husqvarna chainsaw. So the tree faller would go along, he'd cut down all the trees, and then I would come along, right, and measure the trees, grade them, put them into the appropriate grades for export, and then I would spray little dots on them with spray paint and cut them up with the chainsaw. So that was my job.
Now, would these be the logs that would be at that lovely place called Wainawa, where Marston claims the business, but Carlton happily collects the rates? It's a processing mill.
Yeah.
The one that's just south of Marston. As I say, Marston claims it as their own, but Carlton happily collects their rates.
Well,
because which side the river it's on.
Are you referring to J&L?
I think that could be the one. I just know it as the place where the log train sits there and goes to in the Wairarapa each day.
Oh, yeah, J&L. Yep. So when I was working in forestry, I used to do forestry work outside of Masterton, and the logs would go to J&L for processing. So it's a Japanese-owned business. So Carterton collects the rates. I can see why Masterton's mad because it's just right outside Masterton.
Yeah, well, actually, put it this way. Georgina Bayer was the one who actually said that, was like, yeah, Marston can claim it's their own, but Carterton is very happy collecting their rates.
Yeah. Okay, so the Jason. 25 years to fully mature. Yeah, that's pretty correct. For a sapling to reach full size, takes about that year. It takes about 25 years, but normally in the sector, we would cut them down. Well, basically a premium tree would be about 50 years old. but that's still very young for a tree. I just want people to keep in mind these are very fast-growing species of trees. So now what I'm going to do is go back to the boring stuff. Go back to the report that I put in the chat, so people can you can click on this and read along if you want. You can go, Laura, no, you're wrong, if you want. So transparency there. So just a note, I strongly have a suspicion that Todd utilized this report as a basis to form his policy on, because everything that I searched up on the internet relating to what is the conversion rate for productive farmland over to carbon credits, this was the report that kept coming up. So I have a sneaking suspicion he used this report. Now, I have to urge all of you, when you look at this report, you've got to read it with caution because their findings are limited. So they haven't been audited or verified the information or the data that's in that report. So it's not peer-reviewed. We don't know how accurate it is. It's not verified data. So if we have a government that's currently in charge that's using reports that are not peer-reviewed, this is very worrying. Because instead, what they're doing, instead of using peer-reviewed reports to inform policy writing, what we're seeing here is them using reports to support a bias. And that I found that to be quite disturbing. Now, with all due respect, I don't know with absolute certainty if Todd is using this report, but this is the report that kept coming up when I kept putting in the question into Google search and different search engines. So, does this report have utility? I think it does. I think it does provide a pretty good general overview and launching off point for future research, but it shouldn't be taken as like, okay, this is set in stone. Everything in this report is accurate. The people who made this report said that themselves under the disclaimer. Do not, you got to be cautious when you're interpreting the results. So if you go to page 6 of that report, and this is where we start getting into the maths, we can see about 200,000 roughly, give or take, were converted to forestry. Out of that, 21% was converted to carbon forestry and about 40% was utilized for overseas forestry investment. Now, over here, before we had Todd saying, oh, look at all these farms being converted. Okay, let's break that data down even further. So I used data from another Beef and Lamb New Zealand report. In 2022, we had about 13.2 million hectares of farmland. 1.8 were being utilized for plantations. So taking the total number of hectares, new conversions to carbon forestry over the period of 2017 to 2022. So that was the period that the data gave me for conversions.
Yep.
This actually amounts to less than 1% of farmland being converted to carbon credits. So we're talking about whole farms. We're not talking about partial conversions. We're talking about what he was freaking out before in his speech, which is full farm conversions, right? So, and I have to caution people that none of the numbers presented in that report, okay, have been verified. So we don't know the accuracy of those numbers. So again, I go back to the point I made before. If he's using reports like this to generate policy, that is worrying. And the reason why I looked at full farm conversions is because this amendment seeks to prevent entire farms from being converted into exotic carbon forests. So it made sense to focus on that. So you might be going, Laura, what about the partial conversions? I see farms that are planting pine trees, but they've also got cows next door. Yeah, I don't care about that, and neither does Todd. To be quite frank, Todd doesn't care. Otherwise, he would have spoken about the impact of partial plantations. Now,
just for those who might be confused, we're talking about Todd McClay here, not Todd Stevenson.
Yeah. The other Todd.
Sorry, when you first mentioned Todd to me, when you messaged me earlier today about it, I initially thought Todd Stevenson. I didn't actually realise.
No.
There is Todd McClay. He actually is still around.
Yep, he is still around, and he's still freaking about the trees. Now I just finish up what I was about the report. Now Todd said that rural communities are bearing the brunt of conversions. Is that true? I don't think it is. Not entirely. I don't think the report actually supports that claim, and I'll explain why. The report, although the report does state that there was a dramatic drop in sales in the last 2 quarters of 2022, and there was a reduction in the amount of land being purchased for honey production. So if we're looking at economics around honey production, I can speak from personal experience that farmers are getting hurt from that. The demand for honey is completely dropped off. In that same report, page 15 states that, and I quote, farmers are looking for financial help in establishing these native areas, so we're talking about native plantation here, due to the cost involved. However, there is still no assistance from the government for New Zealand farmers, even though they have the land available and the desire to plant and maintain indigenous species. So, and this has been a real issue since funding for the 1 billion trees program has been cut. And because of that, the landowner ability, or the farmer's ability to plant out all these lovely native forests has also been cut. Now, I don't know if you're ready for some more maths, but I actually did some calculations. How much does it cost to plant out an acre of native trees compared to, a hectare of native trees compared to a hectare of radiata pine? So it's very interesting. It's interesting. Look, I've even got the calculator. You can do it for yourself, right?
Can you share screen it?
I can't because my computer will die. But it's a problem with my graphics card.
So we found out actually what's wrong with it. It's the graphics cards that's the problem.
Yes, streaming takes up a lot of
a lot of bandwidth.
Yeah, it takes up a lot of energy. I'm not a tech guy, but yeah, I do need to get a new graphics card. But yes, so if you follow along that, in my calculations, I used the land mass size of about 1 hectare, with trees spaced about 1.5 meters apart. So basically, this means I can fit about 4,500 plants on a piece of land, right? Hectare of land, I can fit about 4,500 plants on it. When you're planting out native trees, you need to use a 3-to-1 shrub to tree ratio, because many of our native trees rely on shrubs as a nurse cover. So because they take a while to grow, they need the extra support from your shrubs like your manuka and your tikoka trees and your kowhai trees and all that lovely stuff. So as a comparative species, I use tortora because that's also that's a podocarp species that has similar kind of in my opinion, it's more similar to macrocarpa than it is to radiata pine. Radiata pine is absolute rubbish. I can.
Is radiata pine better to be firewood than it would be to actually be real wood?
It's rubbish as firewood because it doesn't have much in terms. It's not a very dense wood. It's quite soft, so it doesn't hold its heat the same way like manuka does. But anyways, when I did the calculations, how much is it going to cost for me to plant out about 1,000 tortora trees, because it's got that 3-to-1 ratio, right? Yeah. It works out to about $5,000 per hectare. And that's just for the trees, not for the shrubs or the labor involved. Radiata pine, in comparison, costs about a bit over $1,000 per hectare to plant out. That's just for the trees, not for the labor or anything, just for the trees. So you can see the price difference. And you can see when you scale that out, why farmers need support from the government to do those big native plantations.
Yeah, we have a point of order from Rajan.
Oh, a crappy one.
How many screens can you get off it?
I mean, I've got 2 screens running right now.
Yep. Oh yeah, which my one, the one over there, that can do up to 3 screens on the card. But yeah, pretty much basically. It runs good at 2. It doesn't run great at 3. The broadcasting computer can go up to 4.
Yeah. So
more from Soraya. Boy, Soraya's hammering the facts.
I found many native trees didn't survive. Planted with elder, they're quick growing and support slower growing species. Slower growing natives. Yeah. Actually, you are right, Soraya. There's a guy down the South Island. He's opposite Onuku Marae, which is my marae, and he's used gorse as a nurse species to support a lot of those native trees coming up. So yeah, some of the exotic species can be used for that.
Yeah.
So that's a mixed forest plantation. I'm a big advocate of that.
Yeah. So should we now move on to Deborah Russell?
But wait, I've got more. No.
Thank you,
It's all
Suzanne Paul.
It's all right, guys. It's over. My monologue is over. Yes, you may continue.
Okay.
The party will offer very cautious support for this bill through to the Select Committee. It is cautious because of the very short report back date, because we think some of the issues that need to be worked through are quite significant. And it is cautious because in some ways this bill just doesn't go far enough. In some ways it maybe goes too far. There's a whole set of issues that we need to work through very, very carefully. So let me first of all tackle one way in which the bill may not go far enough. This bill will limit the amount of land that can be converted to forestry for ETS purposes. But there is a huge question around whether or not we should have forestry in the emissions trading scheme at all, a question that was really highlighted by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment recently in his report on examining the drivers of forestry in New Zealand. This is an issue that needs to be examined in depth and considered. And of course, this particular bill starts to work around some of the issues in forestry, but by no means all of them. But that sort of issue we do need to have a look at. In the Labour Party, we are fully cognizant of the effect on rural communities of the impact of afforestation, of the extent to which particularly remote rural communities are being affected. We've spent a bit of time with Federated Farmers recently. A lot of us went to field days. We heard some of the stories about what was going on in rural communities. And this is why we do actually support some of the intent of this bill, because we do recognise the need to protect those communities. We've heard that and do that. Nevertheless, there are, as I said, questions that need to be worked through. Let's just talk about some of them. So one of the things that's sitting in the regulatory in the regulatory impact statement, which was incidentally quite hard to find because it's not actually on the website yet, but sitting in the regulatory impact assessment, the assessment of the options that have been chosen by this government, there has been a whole lot of consideration of the costs of the preferred option on ETS forestry participants, good people to consider, on farmers obviously, on foresters, on Māori landowners, the effect on the regulator, the effect on others. What we haven't got is an assessment of the costs or the impact on the emissions trading scheme. This will introduce some distortions into the scheme. Now, maybe that's a good thing, but we are going to need to work through that very, very carefully at the Select Committee as well. So there's a whole set of questions around that. And then there's something which I'm just trying to puzzle my way through, and again, it needs to be examined, and that is the ballot system for category Class 6 land. So under this bill as it's come to the House, land categories 1 through 6 will only be able to have 25% of the land planted up in forestry. But category 6 land, there's a special category in there so that more than that can go into forestry. You can do whole farm conversions or significant amounts of forestry conversion, up to 15,000 hectares per annum. And so who's 15,000 hectares? Well, it turns out that's going to be decided by a ballot. So everyone who wants to convert some of their farmland over and above that 25% will need to go into a ballot. And that, of course, means that their land, by virtue of a ballot, may become more valuable for the purposes of sale. So I'm going to want to understand whether the permission to plant forest applies to the land or to the farmer, and is it transferable? So that's a set of issues that, in the short time we've had the bill available to us, haven't been able to work through, but I'm sure that we'll find that out in due course. It's nevertheless, using a ballot like this is has its advantages and disadvantages. It'll be interesting to work through that as well. So a lot to work through in terms of this bill. The Minister introducing the bill spoke of the need to balance and complement our productive farming, our food production systems. I agree, we need to do that, but we also need to balance what we are doing with respect to climate change as well. And it's not just to do with the ETS or with our Paris commitments or with our emissions budgets, it's to do with the real existential threat that climate change poses for us and our farmers, and that's an issue we most definitely need to examine. Steve Abel.
I love it when I find the regulatory impact statement as I'm watching the show. Especially after searching the internet for the damn thing before the show. There it is, guys. If you want to, if that's the link to the report. But yeah, okay. But that's very interesting. Selling the ballot, yeah, that could really distort the market.
Well, that's the thing. Is the license tied to the property, or is it tied to the owner? Now, if we take away from forestry and we go into, say, hospitality, the health certificate is tied to the limited liability company or the sole trader. And the same with the liquor license. If you have a change in owner in the same premises, you have to apply for a new set of licenses. Now, does that, now would that apply to the forestry ballot? Because, because that could be something in there. Now, this is something where I believe it should apply to the property and not necessarily to the owner, is when it comes to environmental cleanup responsibilities. But at the same time, you tend to obviously get people who suck out the profits and then sell it off, and the new owners go bankrupt to pay for the cleanup.
Yep. Yeah, about the ballot system. I'm not finding anything in the IIS 4 that describes how the ballot system's going to work. So that's interesting. If they just added that on ad hoc.
So we can find out the ballot thing could be set there and drawn at 8 o'clock on TVNZ1 at the same time the lotto's happening.
That would be very funny.
Yeah, you can pitch there. Thank you for our lotto shows, those are our lotto winners. Now, Minister Tom McLean, would you like to come in here? Now, you've got the Forestry ballot. So let's sit there and sit down there and get the big barrel out and sit there. Now, grab off one there and open up the envelope and go, congratulations, Christopher Luxon's pine foresters are allowed to sit there and have land inspections. Congratulations to our winner Prime Minister Christopher Luxon.
It's dumb. I don't know what this bill is going to actually address. I don't know how this bill. I mean, I've read it a couple of times now. I don't know how the bill's going to address meeting our climate commitments. I don't even know why Labor's supporting it, to be honest.
I don't know. Maybe they support it to first reading.
Yeah, it's got to be the first reading. They can't be supporting it all the way. I mean, there's just like there's not enough data on this shit.
Yeah, but also it's a downside of what happens when you have things put under urgency. Because
reading this now, I know that there's not much information about how this ballot's going to work. Why would you vote for it?
Yeah. I know. Maybe we sit there and have it at 8:05 after the lotto draw.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah. Okay, let's get on to Steve Abel.
Madam Speaker, we have a major challenge in this country that we are losing vast hectareages of farmland to pine forestry. And this is because of a distortion through the emissions trading scheme whereby it is cheaper to offset emissions to pine forestry than to actually cut gross emissions. And for understanding that in a climate change context, the only meaningful way for us to deal with climate change globally is to cut gross emissions, which is real-world emissions. The fiction of offsetting has the same practical impact of an alcoholic paying somebody to drink water and thinking that they have solved their drinking problem. That is the distortion that we have in this country to this day. And the worst, and what's more, the person who's drinking all the water is making a lot of money and thinking that they're doing something about alcoholism, but they're not at all. The worst effect of it is that we are not solving climate change, but actually we're sacrificing some of our least emitting farmland, because a sheep and beef farm produces about a quarter of the emissions of your average high-intensity dairy farm. It seems like the effect we got with He Waka Eka Noa, which sheep and beef were thrown under the bus to protect the dairy industry. That is the distortion that still exists. And to give you an example of one of the worst effects of that is that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment did modelling on the current settings, which showed that by the middle of this century that we're presently in, we could face a situation where land use was dominated by only two types: pine forestry and dairy farms. Now, that is a major challenge for us in terms of our resilience. There's a major challenge for us in terms of the fact that many of those pine forests in the high country will become the tinder dry fuel for future forest fires as the impacts of climate change hit. And let's be clear, the major threat to humanity in terms of climate change is in large part how it impacts our ability to produce food. Globally, erratic seasons, prolonged droughts, greater floods, extreme weather events, these are the things that farmers are on the front line of being impacted by. So a sad denial on the part of the farming industry for some many years of climate change as a problem has actually really undercut farmers and undermined farmers' longevity. We think it's important that the government is acknowledging this problem. I think, however, this bill isn't biting the bullet. The Green Party policy is to remove forestry from the emissions trading scheme, to stop that distortion. That is the actual solution to the problem. The risk with this bill, whilst it is a step in the right direction, and Minister, we will be supporting it to Select Committee because we want to see it developed more thoroughly. And we would actually like to see it given the proper time it deserves, because there are some real risks with it. One is that there's a risk that you actually get, with the ballot system, a continued loss of that land, that high country land. I note that Kate Ackland from Sheep and Beef said that Land Class 6 is the foundation of our breeding farms. 15,000 hectares every year coming out of this will add up over time. Toby Williams from Federated Farmers, there is a huge amount of land going into pine trees. That's what farmers will currently be using as breeding country. We can't afford to lose 150,000 hectares in the next decade. The other distortion that we risk is that where you have adjacent bits of land, one that might be dominated by Land Class 6, where you won't be allowed to plant pines except through the ballot, and another dominated by Land Class 7, it could be that you invert the value of those land areas, whereby the Land Class 7 becomes higher value because you can now plant pine trees on it. That's another unhelpful distortion. What is more, farmers, and we hear this all the time, need the ability to have long-term planning in their land use. Being in a lottery to know whether they can plant a forest is the opposite of giving certainty to farmers in terms of how they can plan their land use. The other thing that's exciting happening in the sector is the likes of agroforestry and silvopasture and tree intercropping. These things are not recognised for their valuable use of combinations of diverse, mosaic landscapes where you're planting trees and you're raising livestock and you're producing crops and food. I don't see that this bill addresses those challenges. I look forward to debating it at the Select Committee. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Now that's actually quite interesting. I love it how Steve Abel's on the money of we're going to end up having farming of two things. Forestry and dairy farms.
Yeah. I'm just reading through the regulatory impact statement. It's very interesting, but some of the data presented in it seems to match the sheep and beef report that I was referring to before. So I'm not too far off the mark there when it comes to the numbers. So that's good to know. So not too much fake news, guys. We can only a little bit of fake news. Why am I laughing at my own jokes? Right, it is very interesting that Steve Abel wants to take this to Select Committee. Personally, I would have just voted it down because it's like, what the hell is this ballot system? Please explain.
They probably, put it this way, you've had much more time to read the information as it's been available than what they did, as it was a bill that was put under urgency, an urgency motion that was not made available to read beforehand.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I actually don't know.
Being open-minded, you probably want to see it to go to Select Committee, and this one isn't skipping the Select Committee process.
That is true, yeah.
So that is partly, I think, why. It'll be interesting to see where the party Māori is when Hannah comes up later on in the show.
Yeah, I get it. Steve Abel wants to flex his muscles and debate everyone. I get that. I completely understand the desire to do that. So I look forward to Select Committee.
Yeah. Okay, let's get on to... this speech seems to have ministers galore. Andrew Hoggett. Barely featured on our show.
Oh, sorry, you're in the wrong seat.
No, he's down there.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, Honourable Andrew Hoggett. My apologies.
He's got sheep, I've got cows. Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, I rise on behalf of the ACT Party to support this bill. I think it is we've had some challenges about it, but I do think it is an elegant solution to quite a complex problem. This problem has been around for about 6 odd years now. People have been debating it and talking about it and proposing solutions. We need a solution, and I think this is the solution that is here now. It is a solution we should be backing. Because it will create change. Now, you may argue it doesn't go far enough, it goes too far, whatever, but let's get started with something, because if we do nothing, like happened with the previous government, then more land will keep going out of farming. I want to talk about what is the problem here. Now, we've sort of missed it to a degree in terms of some of the speeches. The problem really has been identified by rural communities in terms of large swaths of land being moved out of farming into forestry and communities being decimated. A point that's well known to me, a neighbour of mine had moved here to my area recently. They'd previously been out farming on the east coast, and basically they had to leave because their entire valley up to them had been planted out, all gone into forestry. They were the last farm left in the valley. There was not going to be a school to send their kids to. Quite frankly, they were worried about their lives if it ever caught fire, because how were they going to get out of this valley? So this is the challenge that's been recognised by rural communities, and this is what we're trying to solve. In terms of the solution, as the Minister mentioned, we are, farmers really have a problem with anyone telling them what to do on their land. Usually much more unparliamentary language is used than that, but then they also want to tell their neighbour what they can do with their land. And we run into quite a conundrum there as to how do we balance that up. And this is why I think it's a very elegant situation. We're not telling anyone what they can do with their land, but we're saying, if you make this choice, I hope the log prices are good, because that's how you get the return. And it is a case of you will not be getting the ETS credits. So this is basically, it's not telling people what to do, but it's removing an incentive that's creating this distortion as to farming moving into that. And so this is really, I think a really elegant solution. I have heard concerns from the rural community around the transitional measures, and are we properly making sure that, I've heard, I don't know how true it is, but concerns raised that some forestry companies are diverting seedlings that were going to be replanted into land they'd bought after the ban. Hopefully, that isn't the case, and my suggestion to anyone thinking they're going to try and weave their way around this is you might find out the hard way that you don't actually get around it and you might lose out in money. So, Madam Speaker, fully commend this bill to the House. It's been a long time coming, and I thank the Minister for bringing it.
And it's probably interesting where he's mentioning the location of the east is probably the Taurua and the Southern Hawke's Bay, because that is a big area that has had farmland to forestry conversions, and that's why you had the McCann Family Trust literally trying to stop many of those farms going into forestry to keep that agricultural part of the community out there, because a lot of their farms are your beef and dairy stock farms, not your beef and sheep stock farms, not your dairy.
Yeah, I mean, yes, he will be referring to the Tararua district. But what you see in the Tararua district is partial plantations. I've seen a few full conversions, even just down the road from me, but most of them tend to be partial plantations. So they're already fitting within this guideline that this amendment is trying to create. Most farmers, they don't buy an entire farm just to plant it out with not native trees. I wish, but to plant it out with radiata pine.
Yeah.
And what Steve Abel said before is that's not great when you've got corporations who can offset their pollution by just buying up carbon credits because buying up land to develop into carbon forests, because you're just basically growing a giant tinderbox. And I don't know if anyone has tried to. If anyone here has received training for fighting forest fires or has actually fought a forest fire, it is scary how quickly a fire can spread. Like you can have a leaf, right? I'm not kidding. You can have a leaf off a eucalyptus tree and you can have that fly up in the air and travel like 30 kilometers down the road and then start a new fire. So
I remember the drought of 2013 and Takapau had a ban on throwing cigarette butts out the window. It wasn't you did not know, we didn't know that until locals told us that it was like, there's a ban on this, and this. It's like, no, and Bruce was smoking his cigarettes. That was it just was not made clear. But yeah, there was a ban of actually throwing cigarette butts out the window for that exact reason.
Yeah, I mean, where were you smoking them? Were you just smoking them on the side of the road?
No. This was at one of their harvest festivals.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the one that is in a different part. It rotates across 4 locations every year, and this particular year was at Takapau.
Yeah, it wouldn't take much for a fire to get going in that environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not kidding, by the way, when I say 30 kilometers drifting along in the wind. That is how far leaves can fly. Because you got all that warm air lifting up the leaf and it just floats along. And it's like it's carrying embers, and then it sits down and boom, starts up a new fire.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Only you can prevent forest fires. Chat.
Yeah. Okay, let's get on to the next minister. God, this seems to have a lot of ministers talking on this one. Mark Patterson.
I could not be more pleased to be rising to support this bill, which is the Climate Change Response Act Amendment Bill and the Forestry Conversions issue. And I thank Minister Macleay for progressing this. It is part of the New Zealand First National Coalition Agreement. In my view, in having the honour of being the Minister for Rural Communities, this is the most consequential bill to come before this House in this term of Parliament for our rural communities. Whole of farm conversions of some of our most productive land, if left unchecked, we're in the process of shuttering large swathes of rural New Zealand. Action is both necessary and overdue. The emissions trading scheme creates a mismatch of profitability for land use options. The current pricing for a tonne of carbon, it's around $59 a kilo. It's somewhere near 5 times more profitable than sheep and beef farming, and sheep and beef farming is going pretty well at the moment. It is now estimated to be competitive with dairying. I know, I planted some myself. I've taken advantage of the scheme. Why would I not? It would be looking a gift horse in the mouth. But this is not about vilifying forestry. It is $6 billion worth of export earnings. It is a legitimate and valuable land use. But we do have large areas of less productive land that we can plant in forestry and utilise the scheme. It's very much a right tree, right place strategy that we're trying to get back to here. It does create opportunities to integrate forestry and with sheep and beef farming primarily. It does, in a mosaic type approach, and it can help cash flow farm succession. So it's not all downside by any means for our rural communities. But when whole farms are planted out, livestock are culled, some 2 million stock units estimated since 2017. That shearers gone, farm labourers gone, stock agents gone, fruit and seed reps gone, vets gone, contractors gone, truckies gone, that's families gone. That's the viability of our rural communities, our schools, our local pubs, wide-ranging impacts. And it is flowing into our provincial towns. The closure of Smithfield Meatworks in Timaru and the loss of some 700 jobs is the canary in the coal mine, and there will be more. If we're doubting the consequences of what we're doing here, when governments are pulling levers like this week's Farmers Weekly, I think, shows it all. There is a quote here from the Bailey's Gisborne director, Simon Bousfield, who estimates the average value of hill country farmland has dropped by $5,000 per hectare on the current market as a relation to and direct result of us bringing these measures in. Decisions we make in this place do have consequences. We're not doing them lightly, but we are doing them for good reason. They are inflated values, and what we're looking to do is return farmland value to its productive value as both sheep and beef and forestry land. We need the sheep and beef sector that is doing really well at the moment and has great potential, and I'm so focused on the wool for this reason. We need to get sheep and beef farming profitable again so that we can be a competitive land use, but they do deserve a fair fight. We can't plant our way to net zero. The burden is falling disproportionately on rural New Zealand and our sheep and beef sector, and we will not allow them to be collateral damage. This bill is sensible. It rebalances the drivers of land use change. It seeks to protect the viability of New Zealand, rural New Zealand. I do take the note of some of the opposition speeches. I do think within the Select Committee it is quite a complex bill. I do think we should be open to sensible changes around some of the settings. But New Zealand First strongly commend this bill to the House.
I think Steve Abel did a better job. Yeah, I am a bit biased here, but look, I think the best way to help farmers and to help out with the distortions in the market is for industries to work on reducing emissions. We do need to invest in things like public transport, but if we keep ignoring the impact that pollution is having on the climate, the farmers are going to be screwed either way, right? They're either going to be screwed because there's more trees, or they're going to be screwed because the climate's cooked everything.
Now, here's a question. This has come through on the question sheets for the local body elections. Brilliant question that came up on there. Now, I'll sit down there and get it where at least it won't say who the person's name is. But it's about flood prevention in Carterton.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And it's definitely, it's basing it on... So it sits there and says here, flood issues / protections. It's quite ironic that it's ended up being covered in the show here. 20 years ago, when I came to Carterton Wairarapa, the rivers were dredged for aggregate to local companies that are set up close to the river for that purpose.
Yep.
As a family, we used to go down to the river, i.e. being below the landline, and this was deeper for flood protection purposes, and at the aggregate being cheaper to buy due to the process / transport being closer. Today, councils have prevented this practice to protect the river. Really, aggregate companies now have to sieve dirt and stone, labour-intensive on leased land and costly to the end user. We also now have rivers that are in many areas at a land level height, i.e. we don't walk down, we walk across. Now, with heavy rain, you have to have set a course for a floodplain to arise, and there's no way to funnel the water for great volumes. Deep rivers did this. Councils and regional councils need to reassess this non-practical decision. The floods we had 20 years ago will come again, and with the current policy, the flood damage will be very large, and will be solely your own doing. Now, it's going to be interesting how to actually decipher a question out of that. But basically, this came through today as a question from a potential It's in the Ballot viewer from Carterton.
Yeah, I know exactly what they're referring to. And my answer to that question would be fixing rivers is a nice to have. If you want to take your complaint to the
you're actually right. It will be to groundswell. It will be a nice to have. And then the nice to have suddenly is why wasn't that essential when their land floods?
Well, I mean, this is what happens because it costs money to fix rivers, and if you've got special interest groups that are coming along saying, we don't want to pay more rates. Well, I'm sorry, that's the end result.
Yeah,
Council's
and
got to make money somehow. They're going to dredge the river for aggregate and all sorts of stuff because you got to build roads and stuff. What do you expect's going to happen? Yeah, of course you're going to get more flooding.
I mean, considering some of the rock that's going on the was it Potato to Noronga cycle lane seawall protection is having to come out of both was it Kiwi Point Quarry and Horokiwi Quarry to sit and fill it from both. One's up Noronga Gorge, one's just before Petone Overbridge. And that's where they're having to get that out of there. Now, I'm not sure if that's more suitable for what it is, but, possibly where that could come from could have been from, in the case of Wellington, the Hutt River, or Te Awa Kārangi.
Yeah. So you know what the moral of the story is, right? Fixing your rivers is not a nice to have. It's an essential if you want to save lives and protect the economy.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. Just look at the damage that Cyclone Gabriel has done.
Well,
so many splash piles, all that stuff.
Also, Jason sat there and said here earlier, I hear you can't insure a forest of trees either, can you?
I don't actually know the answer to that question. I'd have to look it up. But I know that you can insure forestry equipment and you can insure your business and you can insure, I don't know about the trees themselves, though. That's interesting.
Yeah,
you can
but
insure
that's
land.
actually a good point to actually put up there is the fact, like, you can insure your equipment. It's like insuring my car that I drive, my APV that I drive, that I pay, it's about $1,000 a year insurance premiums for it. I mean, put it this way, at the rate I'm going, in another couple of years' time, I would pay just as much insurance premiums as what I paid to buy it.
Soraya's absolutely hit the nail right on the head. Horizons charge our farm an extra cost for having a river run through it. You do pay extra, but Horizon often have to be pushed to do anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a damn good point. Yeah. You have a targeted rate put on there because you have a stream going through that, and I think I know which stream you're talking about because it's the one that probably runs behind David and Diane's place at Kirkwood's Cafe. But at the same time, when do they do shit about it? Exactly. It's not the only one. Raywin and Donald Kirkwood had the same thing. Ironically, another Kirkwood, but not the same Kirkwood's Cafe. Ironically, it was the only two Kirkwoods that were in the phone book, which was Raywin and Donald and Kirkwood's Cafe over David and Diane. And both of them actually had strings running through their property. Yeah, it was quite intriguing on that one. Okay, let's get to Hannah. And get to the right tab. There we are.
Hena Rafferty, Mighty Clark.
Tēnā rā koe te whikau, tēnā rā tātou. I te whare e tu ana hai ki te wahai ngā kōrero mo te Pāti Māori I te pōnei e pāna ki ngā tai āhuatanga e hono ana ki te taiao. Te Pāti Māori notes that this bill provides for exemption of certain Māori lands from ETS restrictions in this bill, principally Māori land held under Te Ture Whenua Māori Act 1993, Māori land on which the status was changed to general land under the Māori Affairs Amendment 1967, and land to a treaty settlement. Te tari whakatau and a small number of Māori stakeholders were consulted on identifying the types of Māori land that fall within these categories. Officials conclude that the exemptions provide certainly for Māori landowners an opportunity for Māori to exercise rangatiratanga. In developing the policy for the bill, ministers and officials considered the interests and effects of the proposal for Māori throughout the analysis. Māori and iwi stakeholders were also consulted alongside the public on this policy as part of the second emissions reduction plan. The Māori entities were in favour of the exemption and agreement with specific exemptions included in this bill. However, Te Pāti Māori considers also the concerns. One, placing certain restrictions on farm conversions, limiting the volume of hectares available for conversions per year, also setting out provisions for farmland planting and ensure flexibility and choice, setting out protections for Māori-owned land in line with the treaty obligations, also creating time-limited exemptions for certain people who were in the process and also, however, protections for Māori land do not outweigh the negative impact on taiao and reduction of the border environmental protections. In fact, Māori land only accounts for a very small number of land use activities in Aotearoa. In that context, Te Pāti Māori considers the bill to also undermine the integrity of the ETS scheme and weakens it further by removing methane, which only limits the scheme further. We support efforts to assert kai sovereignty, but we are not totally convinced that this current proposal is effective enough in ensuring that all our whānau in Aotearoa have access to kai. Nō reira, tēnā rā tātou.
That's an interesting reason to oppose it. I don't really know too much about the treaty side of it, which is weird coming from me because I really ought to know. But that's a really interesting point. How much of iwi land utilizes radiata pine? Because I thought generally iwi land preferred. Actually, no. Come to think of it, iwi land does do mixed plantations, but I don't think that bill is going to impact mixed plantations because it's talking about anything above 25% when it comes to exotic forest on Class 6 land. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, I've heard many different things about iwi lands and all that sort of thing in different areas. I know in Rotorua, they lease out a lot of the iwi land to dairy farming.
Yeah.
I do know that.
Are they talking about... I'm just trying to think what I'm not quite sure what they're referring to. Yeah, just so I'm not talking out of my ass. But yeah, that's really interesting. If they're leasing land for pine plantations for carbon credits, that's the first time I've heard that's happening. Because most of the time when I think iwi land and forestry, I think native regeneration. Interesting. I'll have to look into that. It depends
probably which part of the country. The volcanic plateau around near Taupo Turangi has a lot of iwi. Was it the biggest landowner actually of that particular district council is iwi, and the biggest job they have is forestry. But it was also mentioned the fact that when it comes to voting on local body elections on the council, the fact that they owned, 25% of the land in the council territorial boundaries or something quite big, they only were allowed one vote at the council, one vote at elections.
But just a point of this bill is covering ETS, so carbon credits. It's not. It's talking about carbon farms. It's not talking about your bog standard forestry, right?
Yeah. But I think that's one of where people can really relate to forestry is between was it Taupo and Turangi?
Yeah, but it's very interesting that iwi. I don't know if I've ever heard of iwi leasing land to do a full conversion from pastoral to ready.
It might be a business structural arrangement where the actual work is put into a company that leases it off itself.
Quite possibly.
But it might be doing that for liability purposes or something. Or there might be a reason why it's done that way, but it might be for certain controls.
But it's interesting. I thought this bill excluded iwi-owned land from being subject to this new amendment.
Yeah.
I have to look over that.
Yeah. Now let's get on to Catherine Wedd, MP for Tukituki, which is common where this happens. So let's hear Catherine talk.
Environment Select Committee where we can navigate it further. But look, it's heartbreaking to see some of our large Hawke's Bay stations absolutely blanket covered in pine trees. This is a huge issue for the East Coast where I am from. These sheep stations used to be the jewel in the crown of Hawke's Bay, and we are now seeing them blanket covered in pine trees. This is our good, fertile soil, good land, good food producing land that's been gobbled up in trees in the race for carbon credits. Well, this is ending under our government. National campaigned on putting a stop to this, and this bill is going to put a stop to blanket covering our beautiful, fertile, food-producing land in pine trees. Enough is enough. This bill is a practical approach. It's right tree, right place approach. And it's good to see that farmers are diversifying. Fine, plant the really, really steep stuff, but not the good, fertile, food-producing country where we see our sheep and our stock numbers going down. We're seeing our rural communities being decimated. And I've been out visiting the meatworks in our community, and they have seen the stock numbers going down, so they're not processing. We're seeing shifts getting less. This is jobs and opportunities for many of our families in our rural communities. We cannot stand by and watch this good food-producing land being blanket covered in pine trees. So I am really pleased to see our minister acting on this and delivering on it, and I commend this bill to the House.
Sorry, I'm not laughing at sheep and beef farmers that are impacted by this. I'm laughing at the way how she talked about blanket covered in trees and the trees are gobbling up the farms. I'm just like
well, apparently there's a crisis of that happening in Tukituki.
So apparently there's a crisis of that happening in the Tararua district.
That's right, Catherine. Just remember, ring up Lily McCann from Big Safe Furniture.
It's like, okay, look, yes, a lot of carbon farms have been put in, but it's okay. We've still got farms in the Taranua district. The area has not been gobbled up. Most of the stuff is partial plantation as well. Guys, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Yeah.
Okay, let's get to Rachel Brooking, and let's see what Rachel Brooking's going to say whether this is gobbling up Dunedin.
Honourable Rachel Brooking.
Noting the last speaker then saying that enough is enough and that this bill will fix everything, I think that's slightly ambitious, but we're all agreeing that this is a problem that we all agree needs some fixing. We think that some more fixing will be needed in addition to this bill. But what that problem is, Madam Speaker, is that we have too many carbon emissions. We have too much pollution from carbon and also methane, and this is a problem. So, some time ago, the ETS was established, and it was thought that it was better to give people an avenue to offset rather than really focusing on that decarbonisation. So, rather than changing our vehicle fleet from oil-based, petrol-based cars and trucks to electric or hydrogen, the focus became about planting these trees, these pine trees, that people could make money from. And so, of course, that focus on offsets has made people make sensible financial decisions. We heard the Honourable Mark Patterson speak before about a piece of farmland that he owns where he planted some trees, because that is what the economics was telling him to do. Not that he had to do it, but it makes good financial sense and people will follow the incentives. So that is a problem with the ETS and with our focus always on these offsets. And of course, Madam Speaker, that is why we're interested in this change to disincentivise these carbon forests on farmland. Farmland that, as the Minister said, is good food producing land. And I think it's important to also note that here we're talking about carbon forestry, and only exotic carbon forestry. So these are pine trees that are planted to stay put. They might be harvested once, but then they're going to stay in the ground. It's different from plantation forestry, whereby foresters are out there planting the trees and then planning to cut them down and to make other things out of them or to export them. So that's an important thing to note, as well as this offsets versus decarbonisation, the net versus the gross. The bill is interesting. It sets up some things that I wasn't expecting to see in a bill like this, like the ballot system that my colleague, Honourable Dr Deborah Russell, has talked about. A lot of the bill, maybe about half of the bill, is about that ballot system. There's also a lot in the bill about mapping, and mapping is something that I probably was expecting to see in a bill like this. And there's also a lot of regulatory powers in here as well. So these are all things, along with the transitional provisions. And we heard the Minister say, well, we made this statement back last year that we were going to stop whole farm conversions to carbon forestry. And so that feeds into the transitional provisions that are found right at the back of the bill. But it does seem that there will be, that these transitional provisions are not nearly as clear as they could be. And that is something that we will want to explore in the Select Committee. And I want to here speak briefly on the fact that it is going to the Environment Select Committee, and that is good. The Environment Select Committee normally deals with climate change issues. However, the report back is only the 30th of August, which is not much time, but it is better than all stages urgency, which of course this government likes to do. But I'm not sure why there is so much need for a rush at this stage of the process when the bill is going to be at Select Committee. And that is because we see in the appendix to the regulatory impact statement that there was a regulatory impact statement in October of 2024. And then I acknowledge that Cabinet made decisions later in March 2025, but this has been in development for some time, yet the Select Committee is only going to get it for a very short period of time so that it can come into operation by October 2025. And I think that speed is problematic because it is more complicated than it might sound at first.
Grant McCullum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sorry, Dodge Grant, we're not going to be listening to you. And probably you'll sit down there and talk about a bunch of twaddle and say about the police coming to arrest your wife for wage theft.
Jesus, okay. Yeah, so I agree with this comment.
Yeah, go Soraya.
Yeah,
All I wonder is or I wonder what was it called? Is it Michael typing? We don't know which one of the two.
Whoever it is, I agree with them because
we'll probably end up finding out now which one's the one watching on the computer.
Yeah. But I do agree with them. You know, what we really need to do is have a systemic approach to reducing emissions, because even if we did all this stuff, right? Yes, Soraya is absolutely correct as well. Yes, and this is what annoys me.
I actually know someone who actually planted a lot of macadamia nut trees around his property that sheep grazing.
Yeah, but hear me out. Soraya has a really good point. Our orchards are not included, right? Orchards.
I wonder if Soraya knows my friend, was it Chris Jury and Daniela Crum from Waitra?
I don't know, but I
will find out.
Michael in bed already. He's up at 3 8. Yeah, I thought as much.
Sounds like he's milking cows.
He's a farmer. Of course he's in bed.
Yeah.
By the way, this was a similar work schedule I had when I was in forestry. You're up at 3 a.m. You got to get all your gear. You got to get your big fuck off chainsaw into the back of the vehicle, and you got to drive off to work, which is like an hour away.
That sounds about right, because it's always all the forestry workers who used to come into BP Levin always came in at about 4 a.m. in the morning. They'll filling up their chainsaws, filling up their petrol cans, everything, and buying up pies, buying up coffees, and then you'll be gone, and then you'll see them 24 hours later doing the same thing again.
Yeah, because that's how long it takes to get from work and load up all your gear and everything, and then you got to start at like around about 7 a.m.
Yeah. And a lot of the forestry stuff they were doing was at the back bullocks of Tokomaru at the time. Yeah.
But yeah, like I said before, Soraya is. I would love for carbon credits to cover your tree proteins, because that would be fantastic.
Put that in a submission.
Yeah, put that in the submission, because you've got a day to still submit on this.
Yes, and then we can sit there and see if we can get macadamia nut trees put in there, because of what Chris Jury did up in Waitra.
Yeah,
who is ironically friends with Celia Way Brown.
Oh, okay. So it is the way how it's set up. Carbon credits are set up is really dumb, because, like I said before, you end up with the situation where, okay, farmers are screwed either way. We plant less, so we've got less carbon being offset, right? You still got issues with climate change. Or you keep the system, and companies still have the means to offset their carbon production and buy up all this farmland and screw over farmers, right? Farmers have lost the means to produce. Or there is another one. There is another third option, and I think this is going to be what we're going to run into, is we're going to have to end up buying carbon credits from overseas. So it's like, oh yeah, okay, we're just going to have to buy from India or China or Russia or it's just a bad system. I hate it. Yeah. We've got to lower emissions systemically. We can't just keep throwing our shit to someone else.
Yeah, so true.
Like, the free market can't fix everything. Sorry.
That's right. Now it's time to move on from talking about trees to the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill, third reading.
Wow, that is one hell of a subject change, but okay.
Well, it's one of interest, I do believe. Now let's kick it off with Mark Mitchell.
Oh, no. Okay.
Is it you're seeking the call, Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
The Honourable Mark Mitchell.
Speaker. I present a legislative statement on the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill.
That legislative statement is published on the authority of the House, can be found on the Parliament website.
Mr. Speaker,
the Honourable Mark Mitchell.
Thank you. I move that the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill be now read a third time. It is a privilege to be leading this bill through its final stage in the House, and I particularly want to acknowledge the bravery of victims who have shared the personal experiences that have shaped this bill. Our government has been clear from day one that when it comes to law and order, victims are our priority. It underpins all the work we do. It underpins all the work we do to achieve our two key targets: 20,000 fewer victims of violent crime by 2029, something we're currently tracking ahead of, and a 15% reduction in youth offending, which we know we're closing in on. This bill further builds on our plan, which we know is working. I'd like to briefly outline the issues that the current law and order under the current law and how this bill addresses them. The purpose of this bill is to improve the experience of sexual violence victims who are participating in criminal justice proceedings. Specifically, it addresses two issues these victims face during proceedings. The first issue is deeply disturbing. Right now, under the Crimes Act, it is possible for victims to be questioned in court about whether they consented to or even enjoyed sexual abuse that happened to them when they were under 12 years old, as part of deciding whether that abuse was a crime. This experience is unacceptable and is especially harmful if the complainant is still a child during proceedings. The second issue is that the current settings for name suppression are confusing and out of step with what most people would expect. In too many cases, victims do not automatically get interim name suppression, causing victims additional distress. The current settings can also end up silencing victims who would like to talk about their experiences because the court has the final say on whether to suppress the offender's name. This situation leaves victims unable to speak out or warn others, even though the offender has been convicted. That is not justice. That is a system that protects silence over safety and, once again, takes choice away from the victims. The bill addresses these problems by making it clear that the age-specific offence of sexual conduct with a child must be used when the person was under 12 at the time of the offending, aligning the maximum penalty for sexual conduct with a child under 12 with the maximum sentence for sexual violation, 20 years imprisonment. Clarifying the process for victims lifting their own name suppression by including the process in the criminal procedure rules. Extending victims' automatic interim name suppression to all crimes of a sexual nature, including offences related to intimate visual recordings. Only allowing permanent name suppression for people convicted of sexual violent offences if the victim agrees. 2 additional changes were made by Select Committee to Clause 6A. 2, clarify that victims' agreement to name suppression orders is only applicable for permanent orders and not interim orders, and require that all reasonable measures are taken to contact the victim to seek their views on the offender's name suppression. I want to thank the members of the Justice Committee for their work on this bill, and the victims, their support people and their advocates who shared their experiences and insights. Your input has been key to the development of this bill. The government has heard from victims and their advocates that name suppression settings have disempowered victims, prevented victims from speaking out about their experiences and prevented victims from warning others. We have also heard that the way children are questioned in court is not acceptable to New Zealanders. This bill responds to those concerns. The changes we are making are about one thing: protecting and empowering victims. This bill makes it crystal clear that children cannot consent to abuse. This bill empowers victims with choice, and it makes sure their voice is heard loudly and clearly. Children under 12 years old cannot consent to sexual activity, full stop. It should never be a defence to say they enjoyed it or agreed to it. These changes will better protect some of our most vulnerable victims who have been brave enough to come forward to talk about their experience in a courtroom. The changes to name suppression are a powerful step forward. They restore dignity, choice and control to those who have had it taken away from them. Let me be absolutely clear. These changes do not force victims to decide whether their abuser's name is published. If they don't want to make that decision, they don't have to. The bill doesn't impose it, it empowers. The bill will come into force 4 months from the date of royal assent. The government's message is this, Mr Speaker. It is abhorrent that the law allows questions about whether children enjoyed or agreed to sexual activity. We are fixing that. It is unconscionable that victims feel silenced by our laws, especially when they brave the scrutiny of the court process to prove their case. We are fixing that too. This government firmly believes in centring victims, and it is my pleasure to be here today championing these much-needed changes. I commend this bill to the House.
I find it very interesting that the fact that you have Rima Narkle sitting right behind Mark Mitchell. I can't think of anyone more appropriate to be in that position from the bits we know about Rima.
I don't know. I don't know much about Rima. Can you please?
Oh, it's always about the victims of crime, punish the offenders with the 10-foot barge post, the brick wall, and basically throw the book at them, the kitchen sink, and what do you call it? You know, make sure the ton of bricks that they're and crush them in the process sort of approach. She's not someone who seems to come across much about rehabilitation.
Ah, right, okay.
Yep.
Thoughts on this bill? I don't really have too much in terms of commentary because I mean personally I think it's just sick that that children were being questioned about whether or not they enjoyed being sexually assaulted. Did you consent
to be appropriately touched? Which I have to sit there, like, how can you sit there and say yes to that? Like, the answer is going to be, well, of course you can't give consent.
No, of course you can't give consent.
It's one of those things that the parents shouldn't be able to give consent on your behalf either. And some people might consider that some devious-minded people who are a bit sick in the head might consider going, well, they can't make the decision, they're on the 12, so I'll make the decision for them. Yeah. And there will be people out there who think that will be appropriate. It is disgusting that it is like that, and it's good that this is a bill that's looking at trying to basically put a line and say, no, you cannot give consent to be sexually abused under the age of 12.
Or under the age, or at any age. No one can be sexually abused at any age.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I support this bill because it's putting more power into the hands of the victims. It's giving them more control over name suppression. I have heard that there are issues with this. I think it was Duncan that brought up the potential issues from an ethical standpoint about doing this. But apart from that, I think this bill is definitely in the right. It's going in the right direction. Okay, getting a child to relive their trauma is not cool.
No.
And I support bills that don't force children to go through that, because I don't even know why that was deemed ethical in the first place.
It was probably about the thing of you can confront your accuser mentality, except where do you draw the line on at which point do you have the right to confront your accuser? And that's probably where it's been left untouched for quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, confront your accuser should not mean confront the defense lawyer who's going to absolutely grill you into oblivion. It's like, no.
Yeah. Okay, let's see what Helen White's got to say.
The question is a motion we agreed to. Helen White.
Thank you. I was not in the select committee process for this because I just picked up this portfolio, and it's one of those portfolios that you pick up and you know your heart is heavy with it immediately. You know the weight of it because it is such a serious issue in our society, and lots of us know people who've been impacted by this kind of violence towards them, and it's a terrible ride. It's not an easy process through our justice system, and we absolutely have to do more to address the way that we treat victims. And we also have to, I think, look beyond our justice system in terms of how we treat those victims, because court is a small part of what we probably need to do. There's a lot of work to be done, I think, on first picking up this portfolio in the area of education. We have some pretty strange views out there in the world about consent and what is acceptable. And one of those views is the view that people could enjoy or consent to this behaviour at a very young age. And unfortunately, it's not something that has happened occasionally. It's happened habitually that people have used this kind of defence when they have abused a child. That has become something that has come to the attention of many of us in the legislature because people have come and complained about the old law. And I remember talking to a group about this who were explaining this issue in the law to me, and how the way that the matter was prosecuted had different penalties in it, one of which was lighter than the other, but if the matter was prosecuted under the lighter law, then it wasn't necessary to prove the consent issue. So it was being chosen. So effectively the person was getting a lighter prosecution, a lighter sentence, because those prosecuting didn't want to put a child under this extra scrutiny and have this extra defence raised. That was an unacceptable situation, and I'm very pleased to see this law amend that today. So that's a really important thing that's happening today, and the Labour Party is supporting that change. With regard to name suppression, I do see the issue with regard to an automatic name suppression tending to feel often like a disempowering act to a victim. I think that is an absolutely valid point of view. But the issue is more complicated than that, because the sad reality is there are often more victims than one. There are often more victims than one. And so if this has happened in a family, then it may be that there will be two sisters, and one sister will be the person who is asked about the suppression issue, but the other one will be equally impacted by the result of it. And there may well be two different views in that situation. So it is a much more complicated thing, and hence you'll see in the report the Labour Party take a more nuanced view on this issue. It is a difficult matter. It's hard to reconcile that issue. One of the things that I think we need to remember is that we also place a lot of weight on someone, particularly someone young, making a choice like that, because they live in a community. And so there is real weight attached to such decisions. And there is also going to be family pressure. So all of those issues are going to be difficult. And so it may well be that this part of the law doesn't have necessarily the impact that we hope to see by it. Hence the reservations that have been expressed by the Labour Party members who were part of this select committee. There were real concerns from the Law Society about this aspect of the bill, and I always take real notice of those submissions because I think that you have people giving submissions in those circumstances who've worked a long time in an area and they've seen a lot of different scenarios. And so I don't think that the arguments that they're putting up are academic ones that we should dismiss. I think we should respect anybody who works in these areas long term because they bring all those layers of experience in. So I don't believe there's a kind of dichotomy between listening to the victim and listening to the people who have been expert in those fields. It's very important we do listen to them. And so I take on board that there will be people out there who've got serious reservations about this aspect of the law. But today we are going to support this law going through. And it is very much part of something that I hope will be a much bigger focus on sexual violence in New Zealand and trying to eradicate it and support those who have experienced it. I just wanted to talk lastly about the seriousness of that situation. I went to something today which was on the Marae just down the road, and it was about sexual and family violence, and it was a group of people that are being disbanded that were advising the government, and one of the people spoke up in the group and said that sexual violence was misunderstood in this country, that people didn't have a clue how bad it was, how most New Zealanders would be horrified if they knew how prevalent it is. And I have to agree. I think we're moving into a society with new dangers with regard to this, one of which is the area of digital development, where kids are playing games that involve sexual violence, and it's changing and making them less realistic. It's changing their norms. I think we will have to think about sexual violence more widely and differently than we have, and it is going to matter not just to do things like this, but to think very widely about how committed we are to eradicating this problem in our society and spend some money on educating our kids about what's wrong with it, because we are entering a new world and people don't know. And what that man made me think today was it's not just our kids. It's a society that has thought in the past it was appropriate to argue that there was people liking this who were under 12. It's that society. So it's throughout our society, it's our children, but it's also our adults need to understand just how bad this problem is and how harmful it is. And we really need to spend some money on it. We really do. And we hear a lot about wasted spending from this government. Well, I hope I never hear those words used about this. I just wanted to remind this House that there was no money spent for the Minister who was in charge of family and sexual violence work. No budget bid, no extra money this term. And I hope that gets reviewed. Thank you.
Ooh, Helen's definitely, putting Karen's feet to the fire.
Yeah, I agree with Helen White. But she brought up a very interesting point, and I don't know what the solution to this problem is, but it's the fact that you can have multiple victims.
Yeah.
And so when you give power to one victim to control whether or not a name stays suppressed or is released, okay, you don't, and if you've got another victim who, is not known about or something like that, you could run into a bunch of ethical problems. And so it's tricky. It's like, when is it appropriate to reveal a name? Do we do it because the victim says yes? Or what about in cases where the victim says no and the other victim misses out on having a say or being represented? Yeah. Or what happens if you've got one victim that says yes and one victim that says no?
Yes, yeah. And typically, a lot of times where cases that have had name suppression beyond sentencing have been situations where the victim was a child. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where it does get a bit interesting, is where do you draw the line on the name suppression? Because once the name suppression is down there, the victim can't even do an interview, publicly do an interview. Like, if you remember the Malaysian diplomat, and the person he raped was not able to had to go to the High Court to remove her automatic name suppression so she could publicly call him out on television. Yeah, and it was, I think, the help with Melanie Reid that made it happen. The same thing also happened with a Gloria Vale case as well. That in order for the person to publicly talk about their trauma in a public TV interview, they had to go to the High Court to remove the automatic name suppression.
But I don't know what the solution to this problem is, and I don't even think it's really explored in the regulatory impact statement either. What the possible solution is there? I mean, there is one recommendation I can make is get more judges.
Yeah.
To starters, so these claims can be processed faster, so you don't have lingering cases where you've got child victims and you've got years upon years upon years of trauma, and victims wondering, okay, what the hell do I do? This is that, and yes, we do need more judges. I think having more judges would help with that.
It's interesting what Kiwi-Birb has sat there and said there is, I'd say if it's parents making the decision, yeah, except it's a double-edged sword. Yes, if the parents aren't the offender, that makes sense. Or the lawyer for the child. Because if you do have a child go through that sort of situation, it's not just family court stuff where you have lawyers for children, but things like sexual offences and that sort of thing. If you do have, often the court will appoint a lawyer for the child. So that is where that could be better placed, because the lawyer for the child is probably the better expert in that point, especially if, say, the perpetrator is a parent. Like in my opinion, if the perpetrator is a parent, if you're the spouse of that, divorce the person.
Yeah, I'd say the lawyer is probably the better person.
In consultation with the parents, and that is something that does get put in there. I think there is a bill at the moment going through Parliament, or it might have gone through, about increasing the number of High Court judges by 2.
Well, we need a couple of zeros added to that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a point there. Yeah, but I mean, basically, we need a system in place where possibly every census time we should have a judge to population quota.
That'd be nice if National didn't cut funding to the census.
Well, and also, like, something else, if we're talking about census and the fact that they've changed the census from being 2028 to 2030, which is also going to be kicking the can down the road by one election, that could be the difference between whether we go from 7 to 8 Māori electorates.
God damn it. I love my data. Then why are they doing this to me?
Oh, I don't know. Okay, let's get to Kahurangi Carter.
Kahurangi Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Green Party in strong support of the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill, an incredibly important piece of legislation designed to enhance the legal safeguards for victims of sexual violence within our justice system. This bill is a testament to our collective commitment to ensuring that survivors of sexual violence are treated with dignity, with respect and autonomy when navigating the complex and often re-traumatising legal processes. The key aspect of the bill, well, there are a few parts of this bill. We're looking at the impact of sexual violence on children. We're looking at the strengthening those legal protections for all victims of sexual violence and empowering victims to have control over name suppression and ensuring a fair and consistent process for that name suppression, those name suppression applications. And then, of course, it's where to from here. How do we prevent this violence from ever happening? And we have some really amazing cross-party, cross-agency work there with Te Aorere Kura, which was, of course, stewarded by the Honourable Marama Davidson. A key aspect of this bill is the Amendment to the Crimes Act 1961, which introduces a crucial change regarding the offence of sexual violations for victims under 12. I know that we all feel this really heavily when we hear that for victims under 12. It seems so obvious, and I'm glad today we are bringing our legislation, our laws, into line with what is right. The bill's new definition changes is sexual connection with a child, ensuring that the legal processes better reflects the vulnerability of young victims. And this change acknowledges the profound harm caused to children, and the reason that we're doing this is to reduce the risk of subjecting them to that invasive and distressing and re-traumatising questions around sexual consent in court, including in some cases being asked disgusting questions like, did they enjoy it? absolutely appalling, and I'm so glad that we are protecting those victims who are 12 and under. And it is an important step in protecting our tamariki and aligning the maximum penalty for this offence with that of sexual violation towards adult. And by removing the possibility of victims under the age of 12 being cross-examined in court around these very invasive questions and this questioning, and we send a clear message that our justice system is committed to prioritising the safety and well-being of our most vulnerable in our society, our tamariki. In addition to these changes, the bill also addresses critical issues around name suppression. And this was a key theme that came through in the submissions in Select Committee, and I do just want to take the time to thank everybody who submitted, who went back over their own trauma, or the people who are working with these traumatised people and survivors. And thank you for taking the time to write in submissions, and also to the people who came in and gave oral hearings. It was so important for us to really strengthen this bill and make it really workable in our justice system. And yeah, and I do take my hat off to the Justice Select Committee as well for working together on this bill. So one of those key themes that came through, of course, was around name suppression. So currently, automatic name suppression is only provided for victims of certain sexual offences, leaving victims of other sexual crimes, such as intimate visual recordings. And so this is inconsistent and creates a situation where some victims may be exposed without their consent or even awareness. So for many victims, the fear of being publicly named can be deeply, deeply distressing and contribute to further trauma, and we want to reduce that. So that's why the Greens, we strongly support the extension of automatic name suppression to all victims of sexual violence. We know that being publicly named can cause further trauma, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that that doesn't happen. Mr. Speaker, during the Select Committee stage, we heard very clearly that an equally important provision in this bill is one that gives victims greater control over decisions regarding that name suppression. So this bill will promote that victims' view will be paramount when considering the suppression of a convicted defendant's identity. No permanent name suppression could be granted without the victim's agreement, except in cases where the victim is unreachable or unable to engage. And we think that this is a really important change, because this empowers victims and acknowledges their agency in determining how they wish to engage with the legal process. Something we heard over and over really strongly from a range of submitters in Select Committee. Another one of the themes that we heard at Select Committee from our submitters was around the fair and consistent processes. And that's what this bill is aiming to do. It is aiming to create more consistent and transparent processes for lifting that automatic name suppression. And this aligns to ensure that victims who wish to lift this name suppression can do so more easily and in a way that's consistent with rules that are already in place. So this is about good lawmaking. It's about listening to our communities, listening to the people who have been the most affected, and ensuring that our laws are in line with the realities faced by people who have been victimised and essayed. I want to acknowledge again the extensive and really important work of the Justice Committee, which scrutinised this bill and worked really hard together to enhance the legislation, and I'm really proud of the work that we have done together. It's been a critical contribution to improving the framework within these legal protections. So, of course, in concluding and talking about the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections legislation bill, it's an important and necessary step and reform that will improve our justice system, and we want to make sure that we are strengthening those legal protections for our vulnerable victims and survivors. And we also must recognise that there is still so much more work to be done, and that's where things like Te Aurere Kura come in, that prevention of family and sexual violence. Te Aurere Kura is about eliminating family and sexual violence, and that's why it is a cross-agency initiative that work together to ensure that that prevention work is happening across the board, and we want to continue to see the government put its money where its mouth is and really invest in prevention and in the community services and community providers who are ensuring that there are these programs, that there is education out there and support wrapped around these whānaus. So we must continue to work together to create a future where survivors and victims are supported and prevention is at the heart of our efforts.
Well, that's actually interesting what Kaharani brought up. And like the fact you could be put in a situation of revenge porn, which at the times suppression laws were probably looked at, people couldn't afford to have a tape video camcorder or film camera at the time, but 40 years later, we have video camera in our hands.
And AI.
Yeah.
There is one point I want to touch on. God, that is not the right string of words to use in regards when talking about this bill. I'm sorry about that, guys.
The advancements of technology that have and the legislation is not kept up with the technology.
Well, I was just saying, the last thing I want to talk about is touching subjects. Those words do not belong together in this type of bill. Okay. But yeah, God, now I've derailed myself. Okay. Yes, when asking minors whether or not they enjoyed an experience, which is sick. Why would you even ask them that question? But I want to know what. Now it's starting to reach into the realm of sociology. I want to know what impact this line of questioning has had on the outlook on the victim's quality of life. And I want to know, because I was looking at the data, right? You've got number of Māori victims, number of Māori offenders, right?
Yeah.
Is there a correlation between the two of victims becoming offenders? Has this line of questioning, this type of interrogating, has this been a contributing factor in creating future offenders? Because if you've got people sitting there questioning, going, "Oh, maybe I did actually like that," and then applied this logic wider on, in a form of cognitive dissonance,
it's possibly sending the wrong message.
Yeah, it's creating cognitive dissonance in someone, and then they go on to hurt another person, and because they don't have much in terms of a sense of control in their own life, and so they take out that frustration or that sick motive onto other people. It's interesting. I would like data around that. I think that's really fascinating, because that could be, I think that could be taken as potentially abuse by the state.
Yeah.
Towards the victims. Being questioned like that. It's interesting. I would like to see research done into that. Sociologists, if you're listening in, make that your thesis, please. I want to read it.
Okay, let's get to Todd Stevenson.
Todd Stevenson.
Speaker, I'm delighted to take a call on the third reading of the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill. As already been said tonight, we're proud to be part of a government that actually is victim-focused, and we've actually put a target on reducing victimisations in New Zealand. And what this bill does is really, it is about improving the experience of victims in the criminal justice system, particularly those victims of sexually based offences, which are particularly heinous and unpleasant. And it makes two really important but simple changes. It really makes sure that the victims of sexual offending under 12 are appropriately treated in the criminal justice system, and we've heard some talk about that tonight, and so we're making sure that those vulnerable children are appropriately protected as a prosecution is happening. And it makes these really important changes around name suppression, and particularly allowing victims to speak out if they want. And that's the key thing, empowering victims to be able to speak out if they want by clarifying the process under which they can lift name suppression. So I commend this bill to the House.
Oh God, he got through that. He got through that really quickly, considering the Act Party's history of Tim Yago.
Very good points.
Yeah, no, he was in and out very quickly, because Tim Yago had a very long name suppression, and he assaulted two underage minors. Oh, wait, what, underage minors? He assaulted two underage males.
Yes.
So it's like, oh man, having to.
I'm
never going to let the Act Party forget
your
that.
gay MP to have to sit there and deal with that.
Oh yeah, true. I forgot about that too. It's like, yeah, man, they did Todd dirty there. And
yeah, well, put it this way: Todd doesn't ram his sexuality down other people's throats.
I don't think those are the right words to use.
Well, he doesn't make a big deal about it. It's something like, I mean, put it this way: we don't know if his partner Alex is called Mr. Alex Stevenson. We just know he's a partner called Alex.
We don't need to be ramming things down people's throats. That's probably not a good analogy. Shit. Okay. Yeah. But anyways, Tim Yago, very, very, like, yeah. It's like, bro, the Act Party's never going to live that down.
Oh, they'll live it. I mean, some people would be completely blocked out of their minds. No.
Yeah, well, I'm going to make sure it's
no. And that also possibly has to sit there, and I do believe Tim Yago needs to be a reminder for it. It needs to be reminded because they were
Good point, Kiwi
they were the party of it should be name suppression should not be used or abused, and he literally did exactly that. Yeah.
But yeah, the fact, if you look into it, right, you had David Seymour telling the victim, "Oh, just use my family lawyer. They're related to me. Use my, just things like that." It's like, oh my god. It's like, yeah, that's. I mean, I would have, if I had to stand up for ACT and read that statement, you would have seen sweat coming down the sides of my head. I would just be like, nah. I'll just hold up a billboard. I wouldn't dare to speak.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to Casey Costello.
The Honourable Casey Costello.
Mr Speaker, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak in support of the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill. The Introductory Minister has given an outstanding outline of what this piece of legislation is. It is important we get this into law, and we commend the bill to the House.
Whoa, I thought she would have had a much longer speech as being a former police officer, and I'm pretty sure if she's dealt with migrant exploitations as a detective, I'm pretty sure she's done her fair share of sexual offences detective work. I thought she would have had a lot more to say.
Kind of odd.
Well, you think if you're a detective, you're more likely to deal with that than, say, if you're a general constable. Because a detective tends to, their role is investigations, not general policing.
I mean, to be fair, maybe she was busting to use the toilet and just wanted to get in and out. I mean, I get that. I understand. Yeah. But yeah, no, that was odd. I would expect, like you said, I expected her to say more.
Yeah, she's got the experience in it. Very weird to sit her say. She has the work experience in the criminal investigation field. Yeah. Should we get on to Dr. Lawrence Zunan?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
5 minutes.
I rise to speak on the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protection Legislation Bill, and this is something that we do support from the Green Party because of the fact that it does make really, although they are considered reasonably minor, but they make really meaningful changes to people's lives and to people who should not be subjected to additional trauma or being put through repetitive traumatization as a result of something like this. So just two particular elements of this bill that we wanted to address. And the first one is, rightfully when we're looking at amending the Crimes Act 1961 so that offense of sexual violation cannot be charged if the victim is under 12 years old. Which then would reduce the risk that the child will undergo questioning about certain content or giving evidence in the court. And I think this is something that, even during the committee stage, this is something that the House broadly has clear consensus over. And I think the other thing is when we're looking at the second part of this bill, and again, we wanted around the automatic name suppression for complainants in sexual cases. And again, we want to draw back to the work that could be done and the work that is intended to be done by Te Aroha Kura, the national strategy to eliminate family violence and sexual violence. And again, that particular piece of action plan and documentation is something that is going to move towards addressing this really concerning and systemic issue here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So specifically, one of the things that we looked at during the committee stage is around some of the details and potentially some of the improvement or consistency that's being made as a result of this. And I think for part 2 in particular, when we're looking at the Criminal Procedures Act, which talks about the automatic name suppression for complaints cases, that we have heard from survivors and from victims and from complainants that they do not need to have such protection, and find that applying to lift the suppression can be that slow and difficult and expensive process, which again reinforces the idea that we are looking at people who have suffered a lot as a result and are potentially re-traumatized as a result of this process. And I think, again, I know I mentioned it in previous speeches as well, but I really want to draw the House's attention again to Giselle Pellico, who bravely lifted her name suppression against her husband in France and is able to bravely talk about her story and experience. And so that way it raises a nationwide campaign highlighting the concerns around sexual violence in France. And I think this is a really, really good example of different people wanted to get through and wanted to reclaim themselves and feel a sense of empowerment in different ways, and name suppressions may not be able to achieve that. We did, however, ask the Minister a couple of specifically nuanced questions, and we did manage to get some responses from the Minister around what happens when there are two complainants and one decided to lift name suppression while the other didn't. And those are kind of the things that potentially may play out in situations that may not be anticipated as a result of the regulatory impact statement or the introduction of this bill. And we are quite happy with the way that the minister conducted themselves and be able to respond to our questions. So again, overall, the Green Party is supportive of this bill, as we have been supportive of other bills that strengthens protection against the most vulnerable communities and the most vulnerable parts of our communities. And it could be this, it could be litigant abuse, it could be other forms of family protection or family violence or that we're looking at. But ultimately, these are kind of the things that we really need to be looking more towards when we're introducing bill to this House, and how we can have equitable treatment, being victim-centric, and have better access to justice. So with that, the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand will support this bill.
You know, I just caught something because I'm speed reading through the regulatory impact statement. One thing that I caught is that you know, the limitations of what you can ask someone who's under the age of 12. Right. I just realized that only applies to people under the age of 12. I would like to see that expanded to people that are 16 and under, because you know, the minors.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to ask someone who is 16 whether or not they enjoyed being assaulted by an adult.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, an appropriate line of questioning could be asking how did you feel about being assaulted? You know,
Yeah.
as weird as that sounds,
Yeah.
question, but to ask if they enjoyed it is a different. That is, I just don't know why you'd ask any victim that. To be quite honest, what a weird line of questioning.
And I don't know whether 12 was just the safe age, because 12 is, I think it's the youngest age that you can be charged for an adult on certain offences. I think that might be why 12 was that magic number, because you can be charged as an adult for murder at age 12 in New Zealand.
Jeez.
So that is possibly why 12 was that chosen figure. Because where do you draw the line on that one?
By the way, that's also fucked up. Charging a 12-year-old as an adult in a murder case is just like their brain hasn't developed. What are we doing? That's not that you don't throw them into adult prison or whatever.
No, and they can't do that either. It has to go to a youth offenders facility. Actually, there was one who actually was charged for it, and I think the offence took place when he was 12. Was our youngest ever convicted murderer. I can't remember the name of him. But we do actually have a case that actually does reflect that has happened in New Zealand history.
Yeah, but
we do actually have a case of it.
But we are talking about an offender here. We're here in this case. We're talking about
exactly.
victims.
Yes, that is true. Yes, we're talking about victims, not offenders. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. So I think really that it needs to be expanded up to 16.
Yeah.
I do have issue with, because you know,
and I wonder if it changes the guidelines. I wonder if it also establishes guidelines on how to deal with those cases between 12 and 16 as well. Because it was also, I think the aim behind the law is meant to also be able to use video testimony or evidence gathering from the police to substitute an in-person witness appearance. You know, which would be more appropriate in many situations, as the video evidence at the time of when the event happened of the interview would be more appropriate as the evidence versus, say, a recollection of a statement that could be 2 to 3 years down the track. Because many sexual offence cases they're not, I wouldn't call speedy trial provisions. Most of them take years before they end up in front of the courts from the time of the offence.
I mean, listen, I don't disagree with the logic here. I just want the logic to be expanded to include people under the age of 16, because technically you can't consent if you're under the age of 16 in New Zealand. So why not just expand the provision to also include everyone that's 16
you can
and under?
consent from under the age of 16, but yes, for most things, no, that's not the case. And I think the thing you can consent for under the age of 16 is contraception.
Yeah, but we're not talking about adults over the age of 18.
No, exactly. Yes, 16 is the magic age of when the consents start. Yes.
Yeah. And even then, I actually think that's a bit young. For if you're talking about someone over the age, like I know that there are little weird gaps, like you're 18, you can date a 16-year-old, or there's this, you're 16, you can date another 16-year-old. But I think once you start getting, above the age of like 18, and you've got a 16-year-old or someone younger, huge power imbalance, huge level of understanding and consent. Your brain develops quite a bit between that time period. It's just like it needs to be proportional, and I think
as you probably remember, the driver's license age used to be 15.
Yeah, but driver's license is I don't like using that as a comparison, because we're talking about someone who's a victim of assault versus someone being given responsibility to operate a motor vehicle. I'm okay with having a 15-year-old, even someone younger, operate a motor vehicle. Right, you can chuck a 10-year-old on a dirt bike.
I was going to say, there was a point in time in New Zealand that if you're 14 and you lived rurally, you were able to get a driver's license at age 14 if you were part of a farming family. It's not the case now. This was 1950s, 60s territory, which made sense for the time. It doesn't make sense now, but it made sense back then. But that was also when, if you're going to become a farmer, you would have probably left secondary school at the end of 5th form, if not 4th form.
But I'm going to talk a little bit more about biology here, because there's a reason why I bring up 16. The majority of people that are assaulted are female. And if a female, like, you have to, when you look at biology, right, from the biological standpoint, a female that's 16 and under should not be having children. They should not be engaging in activities that bear forth children, because your anatomy, like your hips and everything, they haven't developed enough to safely bring children into the world. That they're still going through puberty, still going through that. So that's also part of the reason why I think we need to also widen that out to 16, because asking a 16-year-old, and their brain hasn't fully developed to the point that they can consent to that level of relationship, because your brain goes through different milestones. They also don't have the level of responsibility required to raise children. Certainly, I mean, all of us here, we go, shit, 16-year-old raising kids. I mean
this is going to show my age. And I'm not sure if your parents used to watch Coronation Street, but it reminds me
of the same age. But for the record, chat, we're the same age.
It was if anyone remembers the Sarah Platt, Bethany Platt storyline. And it was literally a 12-year-old becoming pregnant.
See, they can literally kill a female. You get I'm not joking. It's like getting pregnant at that age and giving birth is actually very dangerous. It's less dangerous now because we've got advanced medical systems and cares and understanding of how anatomy works, but it's still really dangerous. Thank goodness
Shortland Street has not done a storyline of that. Coronation Street has. Shortland Street, I don't actually think, has done a story like that before. They've done 16-year-old teenage pregnancies, but they've never gone to 12. Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. But but anyway, there's your biology lesson as well. I threw in a free biology lesson for everyone.
Okay. Let's get to Andrew Bailey.
Honourable Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just going to take a short call on the Victims of Sexual Violence Legislation Bill. This is a rare occasion when the House comes together on an issue that is really important. I personally, and I know many other members, have also acknowledged the courage of the submitters. I think many of them had a lot of courage in talking about it. Dr. Suan just talked about a case in France, but only just last weekend, 21st of June, we had our own case being revealed in New Zealand Herald about 2 daughters who'd been abused by their fathers. They were taking the opportunity to be clear and open about what had happened to them, and I think this is a bill that helps them stand up for their rights, Mr. Speaker, and that is why it's such a great occasion to be standing in this House talking about this bill and to see it passing the legislation very shortly. Thank you.
The Honourable.
I know you're probably thinking seat warmer.
Well, I'm thinking he's an interesting person to bring forward to speak on a bill about
he is
assault.
the chair of the Justice Select Committee now.
That's even weirder, National. Why would you put some... Why would you do that?
They had to put him somewhere.
But keep him on Mount Everest.
No, in the election of Port Waikato.
Oh, with the Justice Select Committee after being accused of assault is just like, come on, man.
Well, I mean, James Meagher did move his way up to ministerial ranks, so yeah, he had to go somewhere, and they had to have someone who was a chair from National, and Andrew Bailey ain't exactly inexperienced. So,
well, I mean, hey, at least he's not Tim Yago.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because it's the irony. It's dark humor. Yeah. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's painful.
Should we go to Ginny Anderson? Yeah, yes. Let's see what Ginny's got to say. This will be interesting.
Ginny Anderson.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call on the Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Legal Protections Legislation Bill. So this bill does two different things. It clarifies law in the area where there are sexual crimes and there's two separate offences specified where it makes an offence to have sexual connection with a child or a person defined under 12, and consent is not relevant under section 132, but 1321, but under 1322 explicitly states that consent is not a defence, which means harmful lines of questioning are less likely to be pursued. However, despite the age-specific offence being available, rape or unlawful sexual connection with a child is often charged as sexual violation under section 128B, and under this section, lack of consent and lack of reasonable belief in consent are key elements that may be proved. Therefore, children could be cross-examined about whether they wanted, asked for, or even enjoyed sexual activity. So what this legislation does is make sure that sexual violation carries a maximum penalty of 20 years of imprisonment, whereas sexual connection with a child had only 14. So it brings them into line and it stops children being asked if they consented to sexual abuse or rape. And so this was first looked at by both Camilla Bellich and Emily Henderson when we were in government, and they relentlessly pursued this with the Minister of Justice at the time to the point where they finally agreed to put in a bill. So it's a good example of backbenchers taking up an issue and relentlessly pursuing it to see a legal change. The second area that this touches on is the area of name suppression. And before I go into that, I'd just like to quickly relay a story, a personal story, when I first started working at New Zealand Police. And one of the areas I was working in, a senior advisor to me lay out a roll of paper, and it was about 3 A3s altogether, so it stretched right out, and they rolled it out, and they said, that is a rape trial, Ginny. That's a timeline from the point of charging to conviction of a rape trial. And that's still the case in New Zealand. That takes years to go through a rape trial, that women are still questioned about details of their life and re-traumatised through the criminal justice system, to the point where it prevents people from reporting sexual violence, because the process of holding the offender to account is so traumatising that it actually puts people off from reporting and enabling justice to happen. So this is a small step with these provisions. These are small steps to try and make that traumatic process slightly less traumatic. But we have a really long way to go, Mr. Speaker, to enable a system which enables victims to want to come forward and to give evidence and be treated fairly before the court, but also to have their dignity retained through that process. And I would like to acknowledge everyone who's had to go through that process. It is a very difficult one indeed. And I'd like to acknowledge that there have been some good changes made in terms of the way whangarei and the court they run up there, in terms of how the courtroom is set up, how victims are treated, how evidence is given, and enabling victims to come forward and tell their stories in a way in which they're not traumatised. We already made changes that made it what would happen if someone would be questioned about their sexual history, about their promiscuity, around their what they were wearing. Those sorts of questioning was able to be made, and so there's already been changes made around that to be more in line with the UK. So some of these changes are just a few of the ones that we made when in government, and this is actually the last couple of bills that I introduced as the Minister of Justice that are getting their final reading now. We do have some concerns with the provisions in and around name suppression, and there's been some excellent examples given of cases where, whether it's France or I think of the Mama Hooch cases in Christchurch, where victims stepped up and were pleased to be able to hold their offender to account publicly, and they have every right to be able to do that. But that is their choice and their ability to do that. And we have, along with other advocates in the sector, raised some concerns about the pressure being placed on victims to have effectively a veto right on whether name suppression will be provided or not to the accused. And so those reservations have been highlighted. The one in particular is that there is more stress or pressure because of the weight of that decision. and that there could be victims that are exposed from other family members who have a vested interest in getting a conviction of the person in the dock. And there's no bottom age limit in this bill where victims could be consulted, which could potentially result in children being given the decision power despite potentially not fully understanding the consequences. And so there are some concerns there. There's also an issue in and around multiple victims. It is unclear what would happen in the situation where there is intergenerational sexual offending. And there are cases where this occurs, where there is in a small community in New Zealand where there is a known sexual offender who has committed sexual offending against 3 generations. There's been instances where that has occurred. And so while some of those older victims of that sexual offending may well want that sexual offender's name to be made public, there may be younger members who are still at school, who have the same last name and don't want that to occur. So that's a real concern as to how that would be weighed up, because there'd be some strong views that they should be called out, but as long as the interests of all those victims are being weighed up, we really hope that that occurs. We would really dislike for this to prolong the trauma of sexual violence within our justice system, which is already, as I've explained, incredibly traumatic for victims of sexual violence. The policy process of developing the name suppression amendments in this bill was quite concerning, and part of the reason why this bill has come halfway through this government's term, when it was introduced by our government back in 2023, is because the Minister of Justice took quite a bit of time to take a look at name suppression and to make those changes. It was held up for close to a year while he did that. And so we still have some concerns around that policy process. And actually, I felt it was important to put it on the record, Mr. Speaker, about what was the process to arrive at this decision. Because it's well and good to say that you support victims and you're doing this for victims, but we should talk to victims and the people who work alongside of those people and take into account those views. The officials in their advice to the committee stated that the Minister directed us to consider adding the proposal to the bill, that before the court can grant a permanent name suppression to a person convicted of sexual crime, it must have the agreement of the victim of that crime. They state that we did not have access to a fully detailed problem definition. This is problematic. We have discussed the proposal with the Minister to better understand his intention and to more clearly define the problem. However, we were not able to obtain full context or clarity. This is after they spoke to him. We have therefore made some assumptions in our assessment of the proposal. So it's great that you've clearly done something to help victims, but the officials themselves have stated that this was not done with a clear problem definition. So yes, we support this bill, but we have some real concerns that it hasn't been done with a full, thorough analysis of what is the problem you are solving, which, to be honest, Mr. Speaker, is quite typical of this government.
Well, we learnt something from Ginny there. I did not know about sentencing aspects, but it's great to know that the sentencing are about to be in line with other offences of similar nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a bit disturbed that we have the Kiwi Skirt asked, do they actually call it the Forbidden Scroll? I was like, no, I wrote that because for starters, why is an entire case the length of a scroll? Like this just rolled out, and it's like, I don't want that. I don't want that. How do we reduce that? Can we get more judges or something? Can we speed it up? I don't want forbidden grape scrolls.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah, we wouldn't necessarily want that, yeah.
I use the word grape because I want to be monetized.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how.
I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because this is just very painful and awkward. But yeah, it's a nervous laugh. But so if anyone who's a victim of sexual assault, I want everyone to know that I'm not laughing at anything that you've gone through. I've always had this weird nervous tick about me. I laugh at things. I'm not laughing at what happened to you if you are a victim of assault, and I want the best outcomes for you. I do care about what you've gone through. So I'm sorry if I showed any inappropriate laughter around the subject. It's just, unfortunately, it's just a dumb thing that my dumb brain does from dumb time to times.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's 10 o'clock. Time to... Let's have a quick nosy to see how Kai for Fort is going. Let's see how it's still... So Andrew is still going quite strong.
Still going! Crash the stream. Say hello, we're still streaming, we're watching you.
I disagree. And I admit I disagree for no other reason than I have to be hopeful.
Look at that, you get two streams
Yeah,
for the price of one.
exactly.
I did think about you at 9 o'clock. I was like, oh, what time was the crash? But I was a bit late by then. So welcome back.
We're live.
Thank you for coming
Tell them
back.
we're live. Tell them we're still streaming.
I think Mandani is going to lose in the LA.
Yeah, I think we've hit it. We've said enough. So
Yeah. We'll leave Andrew.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Noticing some of our friends also in that stream as well.
You guys are watching two streams.
Yeah, we need to somehow make that work. Maybe some of these people need two devices. Okay, the bills that we have coming up for submissions that close within there. Yes, the Public Finance Amendment Bill, which I think is it's the bill with Andy Foster's with the can coal miners have checking accounts at BNZ and Kiwi-Birb bill?
Yeah.
That closes tomorrow at midnight.
Yep.
The Climate Change Response Emissions Trading Conversion Bill that we've just talked about. Oh,
yep.
Get your submission. You got to start typing up your submissions now. That closes at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
I don't know why it closes at 9 a.m., but
Possibly because it's suspected that could crash the website. Inquiries into the port and maritime sector is closing at what's it called? Next Sunday. Financial Services Provider Disputes Resolution Amendment Bill closes Monday the 23rd of June. Not June, July. I think it must be July. That won't be June. Overseas Investment, National Trading Interest Test, whatever. You get the gist of it. Wednesday the 23rd. The Game Animal Council Herds of Special Interest Amendment Bill the 24th. And the Immigration Fiscal Sustainability Systems Integrity Amendment Bill closes Monday the 28th. And if you'd like to get a lovely hoodie that you'll see me wearing right here, you can buy one for $100 from our website. Or you can get a shirt for $50.
Well, what's happened to your hoodie? It's beaten up.
Sorry?
What's happened to your hoodie? It's been beaten
Go
up.
for the washing machine.
Okay. Maybe wash it inside out.
A little bit hard with a zip.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, hey, you get a nice worn vintage look.
So it's just what it is. Yeah. So those are the bills that are coming up. Now, just for those who are wondering what's going to be happening in the next week, next Sunday we're having a marathon. 7 hours of the regulatory standards bills oral submissions. So
wowee.
Yep. And I'm going to see if we can try and get someone like we did with Lisa Eyre. We'll get a bunch of experts who hate the bill to appear on the show.
You need to convert your washing machine into becoming a fan of the channel.
I don't know. I'm not sure who owns it, whether it's by flatmate Brad or the landlords, which are AKA his parents.
Okay. I hope your washing machine doesn't downvote the stream.
That's actually a good way of putting it. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, I hope the washing machine doesn't downvote the stream. God, I don't know. Our washing machine ain't smart.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah.
But only dumb things downvote our stream.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, let's get to see everyone back on Sunday at the earlier time of 3 p.m. We will go into a massive major marathon of meeting a bunch of interesting experts of there, and we get to see how the regulatory standards bill goes. So thank you for watching. Welcome, Big E, for jumping onto the show for the last minute of the showing yourself off. And we'll see you guys at 3 p.m. next Sunday. Have a good evening.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament, To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/it'sintheballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions.